There is a woman living in a Buenos Aires neighborhood whose legal name was written for her by the Attorney General of Colombia. She did not choose it. It was drafted in 1993 as part of a transaction, and she has answered to it for more than 30 years. And in 2000, an Argentine television broadcast revealed who was behind it. Within hours of that broadcast, police who had been watching her apartment for months came through the door and arrested her. That is the life of Pablo Escobar's widow, and it is not the life you have been shown. What you have been shown is the woman in the background of the photographs. The one at Hacienda Nápoles with the zoo and the imported animals and the aeroplane mounted over the front gate. The one in the stands at the football, husband on one side and small son on the other, looking like any family anywhere. Television gave her a nickname and a storyline, and the nickname stuck so completely that most people who could tell you a great deal about the Medellín Cartel could not tell you her actual name, and the record itself cannot fully agree on it. You will find her as Victoria Eugenia Henao, as Maria Victoria Henao, and as Maria Isabel Santos Caballero. All three are correct at different times for different reasons, and not one of them was entirely her own decision. Then in 2018, she published 523 pages, and the story that came out was not the story anybody had been telling. There are three things I intend to establish here, and every one of them is documented. The first is that her legal identity was issued to her by the government that hunted her husband as the literal price of not being killed, and that the paperwork was executed by the chief prosecutor of her own country. The second is that the negotiation which produced those papers was conducted with the death squad that had murdered her brother 6 months earlier. Her son has described the terms publicly, and they were not the terms of an exile. They were the terms of an erasure. The third is that she has been arrested twice in Argentina on money laundering allegations, 19 years apart, and has never in her life been convicted of anything. In the first case, she spent well over a year in custody before being released for insufficient evidence. Hold on to the papers. Every consequential document in this woman's life was drafted by somebody else, and the last act of the story is about what happened when she finally wrote one herself. She came from Envigado, a town on the southern edge of Medellín, out of what has been described consistently as an upstanding and traditional family. Her father worked. Her mother kept the household. The family had standards, and the neighborhood knew everybody's business, and both of those facts are going to matter, because in that world, a woman who defied her family did not get a second chance at it. And the way Pablo Escobar entered that house is the detail almost every version of this story leaves out. Her older brother Carlos worked with him. That is the introduction. Not a stranger at the gate, not a chance meeting in a bar. Escobar came in through her own brother as an associate, a young man from the neighborhood with a Vespa and money that had no obvious source, the son of a watchman who was making his way up in a manner nobody in that family wanted to examine too closely. At that point, Escobar was nobody. There was no cartel and there was no fortune. He was a small-time operator, and among the enterprises later attributed to his early years is grave robbery, which tells you the scale of the man who was being brought around for dinner. He was also, by every account including hers, extremely good at courtship. He gave her a yellow bicycle. He arranged for romantic ballads to be sung to her. She wrote later that he made her feel like a fairy princess, and that she was convinced he was her Prince Charming. Her family opposed the whole thing, and they opposed it knowingly. Because Carlos worked with him, the household had a fairly clear idea of what Escobar was, and their objection was not snobbery about his background. It was information. She went ahead anyway, and that decision is the foundation of everything that follows, because it cost her the only exit she was ever going to have. There was no house in Envigado she could turn up at afterward, no brother who would take her side, no mother who would open the door and ask no questions. From the wedding onward, she had exactly one address in the world, and he owned it. They were married on the 29th of March, 1976, in the home of a bishop in Palmyra, and there were no guests. Her parents did not come. Her brothers and sisters did not come. The only member of her family in that room was her grandmother, who had brought her there. She wrote that during the Mass he looked over, smiled, and told her they would be together forever, and that her happiness was bittersweet because she was frightened of what her family and her neighborhood would say when it was done. That is a marriage entered with no witnesses on her side. Understand what that means practically rather than sentimentally. There was no one present with any standing to check him later. No father-in-law he had to answer to. No brothers watching how she was treated. No family council she could appeal to. The social architecture that would ordinarily protect a wife had all declined to attend. The early years, as she describes them, were almost mundane, and the mundanity is the point. She cooked, cleaned, washed the dishes, and mended his clothes, and she writes that it was nothing exciting and that she was thrilled with the role. Their son was born on the 24th of February, 1977, and because the family rift was still in force, she went through it without the support of her parents or her siblings. And she has always maintained that in those first years, she did not know what he did for a living. The claim that circulates is that until his arrest in 1977, she believed he was in real estate. Whether you accept that depends on your view of a very specific kind of household, and the honest answer is that it is neither obviously true nor obviously false. Her brother worked with him, so the family had information. But a young wife in a traditional Colombian household in 1977 was not going to be briefed on anything, and by every account, including her own, Escobar operated on a rigid principle of compartments. One version of himself inside the house and another one outside it. What is not arguable is that the compartment did not hold, because by 1976 he had founded what became the Medellín Cartel, and within a few years he was moving a volume of cocaine into the United States that has been estimated at up to 80% of the American supply. So a woman who had been mending shirts in a small house in Envigado became, over roughly 6 years, the wife of one of the richest men on earth. The middle stretch of this life is the one everybody thinks they know, and it deserves the least time because it is the most photographed and the least revealing. Napoli's, the animals, the parties, the matches. But there was also the politics, and the politics is genuinely strange and almost always skipped. In 1982, her husband was elected as an alternate representative in Colombia's Liberal Party. He built houses and football pitches in the slums of Medellín, and there were people in that city who called him Robin Hood and meant it. For a period in the early 80s, she was not the wife of a fugitive at all. She was the wife of a public official with constituents, with a semi-official position of her own to occupy at events, photographed on purpose. And underneath that, the war. A justice minister assassinated in 1984. In 1989, Luis Carlos Galán, a presidential candidate on the verge of winning, shot dead. Car bombs, kidnapped journalists. Former President Cesar Gaviria has described the violence surrounding Escobar as the worst in Colombian history, and 10% of the country's population was eventually displaced by the wider conflict. Their daughter Manuela was born in 1984 into the middle of all of it. Her position during those years has never been satisfactorily explained by anyone, including her. She has said that she urged him repeatedly to make peace with his enemies, and that she survived what she calls the inferno of living beside him by building an alternative world around her 2 children. She has acknowledged his infidelity and his violence, and she has said that over time she came to see him as a cruel psychopath. The infidelity, unlike most of this, has an independent record, and it is a spectacular one. Between roughly 1983 and 1987, Escobar conducted an affair with Virginia Vallejo, a Colombian television presenter from a wealthy family. Vallejo published her own memoir about it in 2007, under a title that translates as Loving Pablo, Hating Escobar. She later testified in the case concerning the Galán assassination, and she now lives in exile in the United States. Sit with that arrangement for a second. His mistress was on national television. This was not a hidden woman in a hidden apartment somewhere across town. The wife of the most powerful man in Colombia had to watch his girlfriend read the news. And that is the actual shape of this marriage. Her humiliation was public. Her knowledge was rationed. Her objections went nowhere. And she had no exit at all, because by the middle of the 80s there was no country she could have walked to. She was married to a man the United States government wanted, whom the Colombian state wanted, and whom the rival Cali Cartel wanted, and every door out of that house led to one of the three. Then the collapse, and it came from every direction simultaneously. He surrendered in 1991 and was housed at La Catedral, the prison he essentially built for himself, complete with the football pitch and the comforts, and from which he continued running the business and ordering deaths. When the government moved to transfer him in July 1992, he simply walked out. That escape ended everything, because it produced Los Pepes. The name was an acronym meaning people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, and it was a death squad, bankrolled, according to DEA materials cited in Mark Bowden's account of the manhunt, by the rival Cali Cartel, and operating with information from Colombian security forces. Los Pepes did what the state could not do legally. They killed his lawyers, his accountants, his associates, and his relatives, dozens of them. And they did not confine themselves to his side of the family. On the 18th of May, 1993, her brother Carlos Henao was seized at a roadside restaurant in Antioquia. In June, he was shot dead outside Medellín in an attack widely reported as intended to hurt Escobar. That is the man who made the introduction. Her own brother brought Pablo Escobar into their mother's house, and 17 years later, Pablo Escobar's enemies killed him for it. By that autumn, she was writing to the government asking for protection for her children and trying to get them out of the country. The family attempted to leave for Germany and were refused entry and put on a plane back. Asylum requests were rejected in more than one country. There was nowhere on earth that wanted them. On the 2nd of December 1993, the day after his 44th birthday, Colombian security forces cornered Pablo Escobar on a rooftop in a middle-class neighborhood of Medellín and killed him. His family has argued for years that the fatal wound was self-inflicted, and after an exhumation of the body in 2006 led by his mother and his widow, they said a hole in the skull supported that reading. It remains the family's position rather than an established finding. 17 years of marriage, and she was a widow in her early 30s with 2 children and the most dangerous surname in the world. Now the negotiation, which is the part of this story that has never been given the weight it deserves. With Escobar dead, his widow and children were the most exposed people in Colombia. By her son's account, there was a $4 million bounty on the boy's head. The people who wanted them dead were the same people who had just spent a year killing everybody around them. And there was no state protection worth having, because the state and Los Pepes had been pulling in the same direction the whole time. So the family went to their husbands' and father's enemies and made a deal. The account her son has given publicly, and which the filmmaker Nicolas Entel documented, is that Los Pepes agreed to lift the bounty, and that the Attorney General of Colombia, Gustavo de Graef, provided new identities for the boy, his mother, and his sister. In exchange, the family agreed to leave Colombia permanently and to sever every connection to the business. Read those terms again, because there is a version of this that sounds like mercy, and it isn't one. They were not granted exile. They were granted erasure, and they accepted it because the alternative was being shot. She became Maria Isabel Santos Caballero. Her son Juan Pablo became Juan Sebastián Marroquín Santos. Her daughter Manuela was renamed as well. After a period of movement that included time in Mozambique, they arrived in Argentina in the mid-90s under those names, so quietly that the reporting on it says the president of Argentina was not informed of their arrival. So a widow signed away her family's names, her country, and her own legal existence in a negotiation with the organization that had murdered her brother, and the document was drawn up by her own government's chief prosecutor. And the money, according to her son's book, largely evaporated. He has written about going looking for his father's hidden caches after the death, being told by a relative that there was almost nothing there and having no way at all to contest that account. Whatever the truth of where it went, the family's public position has always been that they received no inheritance from the cartel. Argentina did not turn out to be a clean break. In 1999, their identities were reported in the Argentine press and then on television. And within a very short time of that exposure, mother and son were arrested at their Buenos Aires apartment on allegations of money laundering and falsifying documents. Police had reportedly been watching the building for months, waiting. She spent a long stretch in custody. Accounts differ somewhat on the duration, with figures around 15 months appearing in the coverage, and she was released on the grounds of insufficient evidence. Prosecutors reportedly explored other charges, including trafficking, and got nowhere with any of them. When she came out, she told reporters that she had been arrested for who she was, rather than for anything she had done. Then, in 2018, nearly 2 decades later, it happened again. Argentine authorities charged her, her son, and a retired Colombian footballer named Mauricio Serna with belonging to a money laundering organization, alleging that the three had acted as intermediaries in Argentina for a Colombian trafficker named José Piedrahita, moving money through real estate and through a Buenos Aires cafe known for its tango performances. She and her son have denied wrongdoing. She has never been convicted of a crime. I want to state that as precisely as the record allows, because this is exactly where these stories go wrong in both directions at once. She has not been proven to have laundered anything, ever. She has also twice ended up inside a criminal investigation in a country where she was living under a name issued to her specifically so that nobody would ever find her. 2 arrests 19 years apart is a pattern in the sense that it happened twice, and it is not a conviction in any sense whatsoever. Both of those things are true, and neither one cancels out the other. And here is the part that is almost too neat, given everything else in this life. She has spent 30 years unable to shake the assumption that she must be handling drug money, and she has spent those same 30 years insisting that the family never received any. Then, on the 25th anniversary of his death, she published the book. 523 pages, in her own hand, covering the courtship, the marriage, the infidelity, the violence, the war, the negotiation, and the exile. She said she wrote it hoping that younger Colombians would understand how much blood the cocaine business had cost the country. She apologized publicly to Colombia for what her husband had done. And she did something in it that almost nobody who has told this story has done, which is to set 2 incompatible things down beside each other and refuse to resolve them. She wrote that Pablo was the first and only love of her life. She wrote that she came to see him as a cruel psychopath. She described their wedding night as one of the happiest moments of her life, and she titled the book, in the original Spanish, My Life and My Prison with Pablo Escobar. The love of her life and her prison, in the same volume, by the same woman, about the same man. The contradiction is sitting in the title she chose. The instinct is to pick one and call the other a lie, and I don't think the record supports doing that. A woman who defied her entire family for a man, was publicly humiliated by him for years, lost her brother to his enemies, watched him shot on a rooftop, and then had to negotiate with his killers for her children's lives, is not going to produce a tidy verdict. The presence of the contradiction is probably the most credible thing in the whole memoir. What she was much less forthcoming about is what she knew and when. She presents herself throughout as kept in the dark, as more victim than accomplice, and the reviews noted exactly that. She lived at Napoli's. She sat in the stands. She raised 2 children inside the largest fortune ever assembled out of cocaine. And she has never given a satisfying account of the moment the real estate story stopped being possible to believe. That gap is real, and it should not be papered over. But it is worth noticing that the standard being applied to her is one almost nobody else in this saga has had to meet. Her son wrote a book, made a documentary, and went to the sons of the men his father had killed to ask their forgiveness. And he is treated as a man doing difficult moral work. His mother wrote a book and was treated as a woman making excuses. Her children rebuilt themselves out of it. Her son became an architect, a lecturer, and an advocate for drug policy reform under the name the Colombian state gave him. Her daughter, who was 9 when her father died, has stayed almost entirely out of public view. She lives in Buenos Aires, photographed occasionally on a street in Palermo, still using the name a prosecutor assigned to her in 1993. So go back to the bishop's house in Palmyra on the 29th of March, 1976. No parents, no brothers or sisters, no neighbors. One grandmother who had brought her there. A man promising her forever in a room her own mother would not enter. The scandal in this life was never the mansions, or the zoo, or the aeroplane over the gate. And it was never really the money either. Those are the parts that photograph well, which is precisely why they are the parts you have been shown. The scandal is the paperwork. A marriage certificate signed with nobody on her side of the room. Identity documents issued by the Attorney General of her own country as the price of not being murdered by the men who had just killed her brother. 2 indictments in a foreign language, in a city she was sent to, under a name she did not pick, neither of which produced a conviction. For more than 50 years, everything that established who this woman legally was had been drafted by somebody else, and every single one of those documents was the outcome of a negotiation she had no power to walk away from. In 2018, she wrote 523 pages and put her name on the cover. It was the first document in her life that was hers. And even then, the name on it was one of 3 she had answered to.